education, a lot of educational opportunities for the people who are willing to listen. Things that I've encountered myself and things that, my family's encountered has been anything from, close family friends or the children of close family friends to, throwing pennies on the ground and telling, people to pick up the pennies, you Jew, or, doing stuff like saying, things about, a person's anatomy based off of their racial background. And making it somewhat derogatory. And then at the same time, you have people who don't know that you're Jewish, and then that you share that you're openly Jewish or that you won't eat certain foods, and they start treating you differently, or they start being confused, or they start trying to challenge your personal convictions in regards to how you choose to live your life. So
they try to catch you on that one time you ate a bacon cheeseburger.
Or they'll be like, oh yeah, I'll be like, oh, so is there any meat in this dip? And they'll be like, why? It's like, well, I don't eat meat and cheese together. At the time, I wasn't eating meat and cheese together because that's part of kosher law. And they were like, oh no, there's no meat in that, so I had the dip. And then like a couple of weeks later, I was out with one of the people who was there, whose girlfriend had made the dip, and he was like, oh yeah, there was bacon in that. And it's like, no, you told, does it even matter? Like at the time, was there bacon in that, or were you lying to me? Like, what are you trying to say? Are you trying to make me feel uncomfortable?
That's why I asked you if you eat pork that time you came to visit.
Yeah, and absolutely, and I appreciated that. Yeah,
dude, and there's some racist people that'll straight up try to include bacon grease or bacon and shit if they know somebody's Muslim or Jewish.
Yeah.
Just to be a dick, where you're like, you don't even know anymore. Because, I don't know if you ever could know, but Americans will act like they didn't. The same way that Amy Cooper fucking bitch acted like she didn't know what was going to happen when she called the cops. People, I didn't realize there was bacon. Motherfucker, you made it. How do you know there wasn't bacon in this?
Right?
Don't lie to me.
Or how about don't even bring up the scenario, don't even try and put that into my consciousness of, you could have broken your rules, those rules that matter so much to you, that define who you are. I'm just going to bring this situation up and basically use it as a platform to low-key disrespect you and basically make you defend your own actions in retrospect.
That's why I really kind of stopped going to social meal gatherings in situations where people were going to be ordering food together, because when you're in a situation where you have adults about to I don't want to go half on a pizza with somebody. I just don't, unless it's my significant other, I don't want to fucking figure out with that other person what we want on a pizza together. That's some shit that makes people's lives feel important when it's not actually important. You're arguing over fucking what you want on a goddamn pizza. You could just order your own fucking pizza as a goddamn adult. Stop trying to share fucking meals. Stop trying.
Really, man. That's
and that's different than a pitch-in where people bring their own dish. That's a whole different thing. But when people go out to eat, this is just this Western ritual of having somebody else serve you and capitulate to your every whim desire, fucking modifying a dish that a chef came up with that you think that you can have a better modification on because the secret fucking menu. And then it's all this shit about the way people use service to make themselves feel unique, and in the process use it to be oh, I got this meal, I got this one's on me, and they use it to socially flex and just judge. It's nobody needs that shit in their lives, man. And if we cut out it's not that we need to cut out social dinner gatherings, it's we need to cut out social gatherings where a couple of people serve a bunch of other people, so these other people don't have to think about their food preparation, but all their individual food choices become somebody else's problem. That is some culture that ends up having us with the planet that we're destroying because we don't think about the repercussions of our actions, because it's all in the kitchen, the busboy comes and takes her away after we leave. all the
Yeah.
dirty dishes, it just magically disappears.
Well,
Like
it's just-
nobody
it's-
sees the bus boy or bus woman.
But it's also something like that occurs in hospitals, especially in the United States. I mean, if people, due to whatever circumstance upon their passing, their bodies just disappear. You know what I mean? There are like secret hallways. There are designated hallways, and their bodies go through them. They're completely covered, sealed off from the rest of everybody else. Now, of course, there could be, like hygienic protocols for things like that. But, the fact that basically, I mean, even in popular culture, like, you see the person pass away, then their body disappears, and then all of a sudden they're in the morgue. Like, you don't see what happens in order for them to actually get there. And that's another thing that we don't see like currently. And I think also, one of the things that might be, and this is just straight conjecture because I don't have any hands-on experience in the hospital system itself as a healthcare practitioner. But probably one of the most challenging aspects of what's going on with the pandemic is that you have all these bodies of all these people with their lives that, basically just dying alone. Going through all these. We
still don't know, are the bodies contagious?
Yeah,
right.
No, they are. Contagious? They do. They know. There were I think it was like a month ago. There was the first case of transmission from a dead person.
Oh fuck.
Yeah. So the dead bodies can hold on to this to a virus that can be transmitted. On a very remotely related tangent. When I was in high school, I job shadowed at a mortuary, and they brought in a guy who killed himself with carbon monoxide with his car, and they said, "Be careful. We need to move him." I think it was just they were actually playing a joke on me. They're like, "We need to move him off of the gurney onto the table," and so there's like, "Here, grab his arm." And when I did, I didn't realize that carbon monoxide causes connective tissue to deteriorate, and I felt like I started to pull off the skin like a sleeve, like it was a glove. That was actually really disturbing.
Yeah, it sounds disturbing.
Like, these are things that they don't tell you about dead bodies. Like, decomposition of the human body is this really, it doesn't happen to the same rate all over the whole thing. It's a really, everything has its own timetable. So when people die and then they get put into like, let's say they're lucky and they get put into a refrigerated truck and they're not being stored in like the back room with like on top of other bodies, but they're actually being put onto a refrigerated truck. They're still deteriorating until they get processed. And by processed, I mean like they got to get drained, they've got to get loaded up with embalming fluid, then they got to get put into another cooler. There's
shout out to the Egyptians for figuring that shit out.
Yeah, straight up. Oh man, it's like, guys, we got to get these organs out of here because they're going to decay at a much faster rate than the rest of this muscular tissue.
We need to treat them with chemicals.
Talk about being ahead of the curve. Jesus fuck, man.
Yeah, like 10,000 years ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
Oh, it occurred to me when we were talking about pizzas. First off, I like being able to have leftover pizza. Like, not just like the next day, but later that night. It's like, that's one of the sweet, satisfying things about having a whole pie is that you can keep going back to it for the course of an evening. But more importantly, the officer that put his knee on someone's neck, that guy apparently tried to. He was on social media saying that didn't have anything to eat and he couldn't get anyone to bring him any food because people were protesting outside his house. Yeah. And every time like a delivery driver would show up, they'd realize, oh shit, I'm not bringing food to this guy, and they would turn around.
Yep, that's real.
As I understand it, some of the protesters tried to offer them money for the deliveries and be like, "Here, we'll pay for this. We're just not letting you take it to them." But,
but look at what happened when he basically violated.
He murdered somebody.
Community. Yeah, he violated the community. He murdered somebody, and that's what happens. You essentially turn yourself into a pariah.
Well, I mean, this is just another example of some dumb fuck who never learned how to cook, and so they're at the mercy of industrial processed food, and not even like stuff that they can make on their own, but someone having to bring it to them. I mean,
yeah.
But bringing it back to death for a moment.
Yeah, sorry about that. I got
no. That was perfectly fine. No, it's another fantastic thing to talk about. But what you were talking about was that there's so much that we do not see, and there has to be a reason for that. There's a disconnect between, people. I think a majority of people, and this could also be, something that's cultural, but facing mortality and accepting the varying degrees of decomposition and decay. You may go to med school, you may see cadavers, you see that side, you gain that understanding, but from a doctor's perspective, you're trying to heal people, and then there are professionals who deal with what occurs afterwards. But in the broad scope of popular culture and the broad scope of mass consumption of information, I mean, even in the media, we hear about people violently dying. We hear about people getting killed on all different kinds of occasions, on all different kinds of ways. And people just soak that information up and they just keep synthesizing and synthesizing and synthesizing, but they don't really see what that means. They don't actually have like the vision, the view.
As a metaphor for society, we wouldn't actually see the breakdown of society all at once. We wouldn't see the collapse of a society all at once. It happens in small stages, and it happens incrementally in such a way that we don't notice it. I was reading about how these scientists, they finally put some quantitative reasoning into their algorithms, and they determined that it wasn't an impact, and it wasn't the 700 million years of volcanic activity that induced the climate change, which caused the big dinosaur extinction. It was in fact a hole in the ozone layer and the deterioration of the ozone layer, and it took close to 10 million years to complete the extinction of the dinosaurs. 10 million years.
That just shows our model of the ozone layer has been wrong this entire time.
Exactly.
Like, it's not a layer, it's like an ozone donut. or like whatever Mobius, whatever the shape is not like a
torus.
Perfect,
it's a torus.
Not a perfect sphere.
It's a torus. It's got holes. Hey, we're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. I just been reviewing this tweet from Madonna. It says, brutal murder travels around the world. My son David dances to honor and pay tribute to George and his family and all acts of racism and discrimination that happens on a daily basis in America. And it's her son, her adopted son, doing his, I guess it's his best Michael Jackson impersonation. And I just had to stop it. I couldn't watch this shit. This is like the most tone deaf. I shouldn't be surprised because it's Madonna, but
and shit, and like this shit is so far beyond Madonna that Madonna just publicly just not even realizing what the fuck she's doing by posting this video, just dancing her little minstrel ass son. I don't even want to call him her son, her little minstrel ass fucking toy that she went and bought using this system that will tell you that it's okay to go and steal a fucking kid from Malawi and have him raised in goddamn white-ass Madonna's home, as if that's better for him mentally in this goddamn country, for him to ever be able to figure out who the fuck he is, as if that's not just destroying somebody's capacity to ever understand who they are. That kid will never understand who he is, but some people out there will swear up and down that his life is better because he had a fucking rich ass Madonna mother.
Oh, but of course he's got like access to the Grey Poupon, and he's going to go to a fine school, and he's going to get a incredible experience of everyone else's racism.
That's what they said about the kids that they stole from the fucking families and put them in the armies.
Yeah.
That's exactly what they said about the kids that they stole. Like, and it doesn't matter which situation, because they always say that about the kids.
What's interesting is that
which country you talk about.
In Star Wars, the New Order emerges to replace the Old Empire as the antagonist, and they're, instead of stormtroopers being clones or conscripts from human worlds, they are children who are raised to be the stormtroopers. They're like taken from their families when the New Order takes over a planet or a star system, and then those kids are put into training camps until they're old enough to become stormtroopers. This is a feudal practice that's been going on for thousands of years. When the invading army defeats the home team, they go in and kill the remaining men, they kill women, and then they take the kids and they make them fight for them. And they say, oh, we're, now of course it's masked by the illusion of a free society, a capitalist society that's like, oh, well, we're giving you the opportunity, but it's really just masking more neo-feudalism through colonial and imperialism. It's disgusting.
And just in regards to the tweet itself, I think the message is just confusing. It's a little bit unintelligible in regards to the content and the message that's being sent. And this is basically teaching, this is Madonna teaching her family and the people that she's charged with raising that this is a broadly acceptable way of communicating with the global community, and that it's effective. But I'm not necessarily seeing the efficacy of this particular tweet in terms of assuaging the sheer justified rage and revulsion at the particular actions that she's discussing in this message. So yeah, it is rather confusing, and I'm not entirely sure what it is that I'm seeing.
I don't even think she knows what she was trying to say.
She's got her toy, and she's making her toy dance like a little monkey because she thinks that's how other people get enjoyment, just like her, because she's so distanced from reality at this point that she would. This is the same shit with all the celebrities who are like in their mansions singing, trying to sing to us serfs and common folk when the lockdown first happened, like, oh, I'm stuck in my mansion too. Here's me singing this song to get you through the times because I have a perfect voice. And even though we're in such stressful times, I can hit every single note perfectly because my voice is actually not stressed right now, but I can't say that. So I'm just going to sing this song.
Every motherfucker that was showing off their yachts on Instagram with their 6-month supply of food because they were ready to go on a round the world tour anyways. I was reading about this couple that had been on a world tour on their sailboat, and how they were out in the middle of nowhere when everything happened, and then they go into port to resupply, and then lo and behold, they can't get into a port because the ports are all closed. So they've got to keep going up the coastline, and every port they try to stop at, some local authority shows up and is like, hey, you can't come in here. We've got an epidemic on our hands. Everything's closed. And so they finally, I think they landed somewhere in like Southeast Asia, and right as they get in there, the port closes, and now they can't leave. So they're quarantined on a boat, and they have to pay some local to bring them supplies, and they can't go anywhere because the local government won't let them leave because that government doesn't want to be responsible for this couple spreading some horrible shit if they've got it. So there's like no end to this clusterfuck of stupidity.
Going back to what you were saying about the wealthy and the fortunate having their supplies and having their isolated locations, be it a yacht or be it a compound of some kind or a mansion or a place out in the country or a place that they fly to out in the country because they don't want to be around everybody else because they think it'll make them safer. But that aside, it's basically them broadcasting to the rest of the people who have less, or the people who they consider to be less fortunate, or the people that they don't even understand are less fortunate because they can't grasp the concept of fortune because they have everything catered to them. But essentially, it's basically them saying, we're okay, we're not worried, you shouldn't be worried either. Like, look at me, I'm singing this song. I have my stockpile. Things are great. Look at everything that I have. You can have this too. It's the same lie that's being perpetuated. It's the same lie that was perpetuated before there was a pandemic. Of look at us. Look at everything we have. Look at our Maybachs. Like, look at our mansions. Look at our massive stores of food. Look at my massive watch collection. Like, you can have this too. Everything's okay. You don't have to worry about the fact that you're, fucking stuck at Domino's for your entire career. Not making enough money to feed your family of 4 people because you were taught that, it's perfectly sustainable to basically not be able to, basically live a normal life that way.
And then that models behavior for people who don't understand how to manage $100, and they spend all their money on fresh clothes and fresh shoes and hairstyles and surface treatment. They want to project success and wealth, and so they might look the part, but then you look inside their fridge and there's nothing, and they don't know how to cook, and lo and behold, they probably don't even read, and if they do, it's not at a level consistent with their age or education level. And this isn't like a jab at any ethnic group, because I've seen this across the board. You just find dumb people out there everywhere, and they just want to model their behavior off of these illusions that are created in the media.
This hierarchy of wealth and intelligence to which people aspire. Like, okay, here's a great example. Within the intelligence hierarchies, it goes Japanese people at the top, white people, then Chinese people, then basically everybody else, in a way where it's like, the whole reason I articulate Japanese people above white people is because they need an other to romanticize, and they do it in a way that they have no choice to, because the Japanese, not just the Japanese, but they have no choice but to acknowledge that the Japanese beat them in technological development races, but also in real estate, economic warfare in their own country. And the Chinese did it too, but they hesitate to give the Chinese the same credit, because what they do is they say the Chinese steal all their ideas and reverse engineer everything. So then there's this, like, again.
So wait, the Japanese are better because America just gives them the technology to build and then improve?
It's because here's another reason. The reason that they then try to they justify that they'll capitulate to the Japanese being better is because we won World War II. So since Japan was not allowed to invest money in the military, they were allowed to invest in tech for a long time, which then Americans used to rationalize as to why they're so technologically advanced. This is something you will hear as a reason as to why it's like Japan never would have become technologically advanced if we didn't beat them in a war. Is the white Western rationalization that dictates that white people control the development of everything, even though they're actually technically the minority in the globe. Like, there's this need to perpetuate the perception that white people are the majority of everything, especially economic intelligence. And when it comes down to it, they want to dominate, like, oh, we know the most about rocket development, even though we got all our shit from Russia and the Soviet Union and kind of Germany. We're gonna act like those people are white when it's convenient. And this gets back to that convenience passing, when it's like, oh, when it's convenient for white people, Russians are the whitest people on the planet because a lot of the fucking rocket development came out of the Soviet Union. So they need to adopt Russians when it's convenient to make sure that they can say white people developed all this space travel stuff, even though it was really the Soviets.
Well, speaking of convenience and speaking of the majority, it seems very often that the white majority or members of the white majority oftentimes subvert the role of the minority within the global cultural structure in order to demonstrate how vulnerable they are to the minority, while at the same time oppressing the minority or disenfranchising them.
That's their modus operandi recently. In the past, I want to say about 10 years, once racists discover how many poor white people there are in America, then they're like, oh, but white people this. And once they discovered that some white people end up getting killed by police too, then they're like, but white people too. And then they discovered that, like, there's all these things that white people who are racist do with statistics and these situations to then subvert the people in those minority problems to then be like, well, it happens to white people too, which, as you're saying, completely then subverts the minorities.
My understanding is in China, the top 3 percentile are allowed to essentially study whatever they want. Humanities, science, they can do pretty much whatever they want, and the state will take care of it. And it turns out that number is 42 million, roughly 42 million out of 1.4 billion. So 42 million people are the top 3 percentile of China.
Good God. And that, just think about 42 million people empowered to do what they want mentally. That's like how you get some fucking Federation shit.
That's why China's space program is straight up rocketing away in ways that our space program has only been, our space program has been floundering. They had to hand it off to the private sector because our fucking legislators can't agree, like, that we need this new technology. Here's China playing catch up at a rate faster than any civilization in human history. They are making like leaps and bounds, and we want to complain about China because we've got a bunch of people who want to spend very little money to have to feel like they've got a lot of stuff, and so they're willing to pay low prices and compromise the quality of the products they purchase because they would rather have more stuff than have quality stuff. And that's part of what drives the whole, like, cheaply made in China xenophobia, or product xenophobia. You can get some really nice stuff from China. You just got to pay for it. The same thing in America. You can get really nice stuff here. It's made in America. And you can also get some, like, backwoods bullshit that it might be handcrafted, but it's still made out of crap.
Yeah, exactly to that point. The reason why there's so many inexpensive goods imported from China and used in America is because people don't want to pay for good stuff.
Yeah, they want the cheap stuff. I mean, by the numbers, they want the cheap stuff. At least they might say that they want the good stuff, but they really do want the cheap stuff.
Or they want more for less.
Gone. I think those days are gone, and I think we've hit the peak in that because the supply chains have broken down not by their own will. If you go into a big department store, their electronics sections are wiped out because we're no longer importing shit from China at the same rate. So they can't refill all of the electronics sections the same way they used to. And you can't even really walk in to see it. So you're not even able to visibly see these sections like empty in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, like, as you're saying, outsourcing has given us cheap electronics, but outsourcing has also given us the full-on xenophobia of people who now want to reclaim their position as producers, not realizing that it's going to cost them $8,500 for a Texas Instruments computer if they want a Texas Instruments machine, which is like, that's going to be the low end of the model.
It really will.
But that's what it costs when you get something produced here, where you want something that's not going to break down. So it's not that it's overpriced, but that's what it costs.
Even when we look at luxury computers for the sake of this example, a Macintosh computer, a MacBook Pro, a Mac Pro fully loaded is like a $30,000-$40,000 computer. Mm-hmm. A comparably spec'd Lenovo ThinkPad or ThinkTower workstation is about $30,000. Yeah. These aren't cheap machines. These are like top of the line, the best processors, RAM, video cards, chipsets, the best cooling solutions, and they're guaranteed to work for like 3 to 5 years more if you get the stupid extended
warranties.
I
saw a $53,000 Mac Tower.
I believe it.
And it's like
got everything right.
But the issue is like you could build that machine for $10,000. But the person who's actually going to buy that is working in a studio somewhere where they don't have time to build that. Yeah. So there's this false narrative of like that machine being overpriced, but it's not for the home person.
No, it's for a business. It's for a business that has like really, really important turnaround deadlines. They have to get the product done. They have to get the prototyping done. They've got to get this stuff shipped out, and they've got to be able to make changes instantly. And so, Joe computer user, I'm sorry, Joe, if you're out there and listening, I'm not trying to offend you, buddy. But if Joe computer user's, sitting at home working on his workstation and it's not comparably spec'd, it's just a relatively powerful machine. They're not on a big time deadline because they're doing this for themselves. That's fine if they don't have the $10,000 worth of hardware. Actually, Linus Torvalds, he just switched over to AMD machines for his development machine, and you can get the hardware list. And he spent like $3,500, and he's getting his compiling is taking like 1/3 the time that it did on the Intel spec hardware that he was using before, and so it's like half the cost of his previous machine. So that's where we're at right now. But I actually agree with you that for the studio, the developer that's working at the highest levels, they can actually pay for that computer in 1 quarter if they've got the right kind of business model. And then
and then somebody out there is like, what do they need a $53,000 machine for? I'll tell you what they need a $53,000 machine for. If you think about the Avengers movie,
yeah, dude,
any of them, and then think about all the shit that ended up on the cutting room floor. If you're going to render those films at that high of a resolution, it takes so much power not to have that shit take years to be rendered. Because if somebody tried to render those films digitally from, say, a machine that was built in like 2008, it might take them years to render that movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm literally not exaggerating. It might take years on a machine that's built in 2008.
So back during Toy Story, I believe it was Toy Story, the first Toy Story, you know, whenever that was, 15, 20 years ago probably by now. I remember reading about how they had to built a cluster of Macintosh computers, and they had a room, and they had to develop special networking hardware, and they were using some Linux backend so that they could do the cluster computing. But I think they had like 50 of them, 50 Macintosh, like Mac Pros, I think, or maybe they were minis, but either way, they had a cluster of computers, and now they can do that with like one machine because, lo and behold, 2 processors with like 28 logical cores and 256 gigabytes of RAM or 512 gigabytes of RAM or whatever it is that these things can hold now. They can do it on one machine, and so now the editing job is a lot easier because they don't have to wait for 50 fucking computers to catch up with each other. There's a reason there's a reason these things cost a lot, and there's also a reason that normal people don't need them because, like you were describing, like not everyone's going to be rendering the Avengers with all of those edits and having to have it be like liquid buttery smooth because it's all on the clock. Even for artists who are rendering like, 4 and 8K video, I know they've got powerful machines, but still is going to be as powerful as like whatever Disney's using.
Oh God, no!
I mean, Disney's got just like
they can just throw money at power.
Yeah.
So they can save time. That's like one of the benefits of basically having a well of money. It's like if there's a way to throw money at something to save time, then they'll do it.
Well, there's a development triangle. It's like money, time, good, cheap, and fast. If you want it good and cheap, it's not going to be fast. If you want it fast and good, it's not going to be cheap. And you can only really pick 2.
Yep, that's exactly right. And that's like a fundamental that it holds true in so many cases where you're like, there's a fallacy among people where it's like, if it takes 100 hours to do something, just have 100 people do it at the same time and you can get it done in 1 hour, where sequential development does not work like that. You have to have all of the 100 hours in sequence. So it's like, you could have one person doing it or 100 people doing it. Those 100 hours still have to come in sequence. So sometimes the number of people isn't going to make, like, just throwing people at something isn't going to necessarily make things work faster. And there's people who are incapable of understanding that concept because they have so much money that they perceive being able to throw money at things and have the time seem to shorten when really it's something else that's solving it.
My experience is when you start throwing additional people at things, projects actually start taking longer because of the additional requirements of getting people to work together at the same time.
Yep. That's very much on point.
That reminds me of like the considerable optimism on the internet from people who think that COVID's a hoax, or that there's a conspiracy to use 5G to deliver whatever. That's like
that's weird. You
got to have so many people all on the same page working together, synchronized. That's just impossible shit. And I read about this $350 16 gigabyte jump drive that's being sold online that's supposed to have some kind of crystal that protects people from 5G fields using quantum energy.
Yeah, I saw that shit.
People are so, they'll buy anything if they think if it aligns with their whatever their biases. Oh, this jump drive has a crystal in it. It protects me from 5G. That just confirms my weirdest irrational fears about. Oh God, I don't even know how to project that kind of bullshit.
So just taking that aside for a second, what does it mean to be protected from 5G?
Well, 5G is a millimeter wavelength. It's radio waves, like FM radio, basically.
Right.
It's not ionizing.
Well, it's the fifth generation deployment of the broadband network across the nation for service providers, because it's like they're gonna have 6G and 7G eventually, where it's like it's just basically like they abbreviate 5G for fifth generation in a way that then people who like subscribe to this conspiracy don't even understand what the 5G actually means, because when 6G comes about, they're just going to be like, well, 6G is like, this is what causes testicular cancer and it's something else. And then when 7G comes about, they're, because it's like.
So there are theories about how this wavelength is being weaponized against people actively.
Apparently, for a while, people thought it was activating the coronavirus.
People thought that this 5 millimeter wavelength was activating a virus.
No. Sorry, it's not a 5 millimeter. It's defined as a millimeter wavelength, and that the wavelengths themselves are measured in millimeters.
Right.
But
okay.
No, I think it's much more complex than just that. It's that Bill Gates is somehow involved in a global conspiracy with the Chinese to develop technology which activates coronavirus so that they can then put tracking chips in people after they give them the vaccine, and then they can get personal data from them, from these chips that they've inserted by giving them vaccine because they had COVID, which was activated by 5G. This is a really, and we're talking about jumping sharks on top of sharks now. This is the kind of bullshit that's happening right now.
And none of this is really substantiated, is it? It's just people thinking about it. Like, where did this even originate?
This is the problem. So this is the problem. Newsflash, radiation causes cancer.
Right, right.
So exposure to radiation causes damage to cells.
As long as it's ionizing radiation.
Yes. So long-term exposure to these things can cause damage to your cells, but this has been known since we've had like the first generation of cell phones. So that's why they've been telling people to not keep your cell phone near your genitals or keep it like near your head for like 30 years now.
But the power levels required for 5G for radio waves are exceedingly high, and all they really do is create heat.
And exactly, so it's like over time it can cause problems, but like in general it's not necessarily that harmful, even for people who are operators deploying the actual routers to upgrade the antenna.
Yeah.
For the network, like those guys are relatively safe.
Well, they're standing
from the radiation.
They're standing right next to the highest output for 5G that's possible. They're standing at the towers themselves, and they're not getting cancer. There have been people who've been working on those towers for decades, and if they get cancer, it's because they only eat red meat, or because because they drink too much.
It's probably worse to get an X-ray done when you're going through the airport, which is what people were trying to say. Like, that's not good for you.
No, that's ionizing radiation.
Yeah, the people who are worried about 5G regularly go through this shit so they can oppress brown people by proxy, just irradiating themselves at the same rate as when they're using their cell phones, using on the 4G network. All these people are fucking posting on the 4G network about 5G.
How is 5G supposed to be more dangerous than 4G?
It's not.
So what ends up happening is every time they end up switching to a new band of frequencies, what has usually happened was the military was likely using the frequencies that are the most, the highest range, because those can contain the most information, so they can encrypt the most on the highest frequencies. And then the next time the military develops a new band, the commercial service providers get access to those frequencies. So every time we get a new band, we're just getting the old military shit, basically.
So
almost every single time.
So
almost every single time.
4G occupies the 750 megahertz to 5 gigahertz range, and 5G is going to use the 10 to 300 gigahertz range. That's still in the non-ionizing end of the electromagnetic spectrum. They're so slow that they aren't even they're not even in infrared or thermal energy. They don't really cause heat until you apply huge amounts of electricity to them.
So when we fly in airplanes, are we actually being exposed to even more radiation?
Yes. So if you go to spaceweather.com, you can see the radiation warnings for the day. So it gives you how much you're being irradiated at different altitudes. And that's something I would constantly monitor when I was flying a lot, because again, it's like the days that you fly, depending on the solar weather, about 3 days beforehand might affect the radiation of your flight in a way that's like way worse than the day before. But and that's where monitoring the solar activity and how it would affect flight radiation was how I started to understand how our atmosphere is connected to the sun's in a way that, I mean, NASA's been saying it for a while, but they're still trying to figure out the real complexity.
Yeah.
But if you observe how the solar storms, obviously it's like the aurora borealis and shit like that. Obviously, there's an interconnectivity between our magnetic environments, but there's something very much happening with the solar storms and our radiation that also is going to affect us on a molecular level.
So we're
not give us cancer necessarily.
We're at the beginning of the solar minimum phase, right?
Right.
There has been, and apparently over the course of the last 200 years, there's been a 9% decline of the size of our Van Allen belt, of our magnetosphere, and like we were talking about how it's the ozone layer is actually kind of this toroidally shaped body. So is our magnetosphere, and because the magnetic north and south points on the poles have been shifting around the globe, now the hole is no longer over Antarctica, but it's now between South America and the continent of Africa. And this is like this one location where there's a reduced magnetic field protecting everything, meaning radiation can actually beam in at greater intensities. So normally our atmosphere absorbs most of the X-rays that come from space. Well, now they can get even closer to the surface of the Earth in this area, and it's actually pretty big. If you look at space weather, you can see the hot spot as it's starting to emerge. And so now, there's concern about our satellites that are in these areas, that they won't have adequate protection from the magnetosphere. And, well, of course, there's a gap in where this thing is built. And as you were saying, it's tied to the activity of our sun. This stuff is so interrelated that it's actually kind of amusing that there are still models that aren't accounting for the gravitational effects from other planets. And even though our closest star is not close at all, it's like 4 point something light years away, even that body has a gravitational effect on us. It's very minimal here. It's a weak force, but it's there, and it goes on perpetually.
Yep. And this is the problem with, like, when you frame it like that, then the astrologists will be like, oh, this is why Mercury's in Gatorade.
Mercury's in Gatorade.
They just take what you said and, like, bastardize it. Because, again, it's like, if we're talking about the flow of matter and non-physical matter in the universe, it does not flow in a single direction, but that doesn't mean that there's a version of me doing all these different things in a bunch of, like, an infinite number of universes. Like, people will take scientific shit and extrapolate it to places that it doesn't actually go, because science fiction makes it more fun, but then the real science is fucking awesome, but it's just not, it's too abstract for our brains.
You know, people aren't really good with big numbers, and we've talked about maybe 100,000 might be too big. I think 1,000 might actually be too big.
Yeah, it is. I've seen 200,000 people.
That's a lot of fucking people. Hey, we're going to take another quick break.
Absolutely.
And we're back. I think you were talking about how, you know, some of these ideas are complex and they'll get bastardized easily. And I think that's pretty consistent with practically anything that we can call a conspiracy or some bullshitized. I'm not even sure what to call this 5G crap. It like completely ignores physics.
It's the lowest common denominator, because like I'm gonna talk about this for a second, because one of our frequent listeners, I had a debate with her today about appealing to the lowest common denominator, and in America we routinely have a problem with dealing with more than one thing at once, so it becomes increasingly difficult to try to be nuanced about anything. So when you're trying to solve a problem, you end up having to really hone in on that problem and not get distracted by it. And this is like ultimately the only way to actually solve problems in America. But at the same time, that culture is there because of the lowest common denominator being what everyone always appeals to concerning intelligence. It's the USA Today 7th grade reading level approach where everybody's trying to make sure that these fucking dumbass people that are able to exist in our economy, like, it's not the fact that they're uneducated, it's the fact that they're dumb. Like, education doesn't have anything to do with one's intelligence level. You have a bunch of dumbass people who believe in ghosts but don't think the ghosts of my fucking ancestors will come back and burn down their shit.
I've actually got a theory about that, and I want you to finish what you're talking about. No, I'm just gonna inject this real quick. So my theory on why there are no black ghosts is because
of course there's black ghosts.
Well, no, I mean in American culture is that black people were hunted and enslaved and just treated like horribly, and that's what the reason we see a lot of white ghosts is because those are the tormentors, and they're stuck on Earth.
No, dude. This whole like rationalization is based around the ghost hunters lore of them examining fucking plantations and not having the ghosts just coming back and cuss them out on tape. Because then it justifies this notion that like, oh, the black ghosts aren't mad. The black ghosts will let you come have your fucking wedding at a plantation. Because guess what? We had people go in and ghost hunting there. They couldn't find anything. These ghosts aren't going to fucking haunt you and show up in your wedding pictures. So come on down to our plantation, and guess what? If the ghost shows up, it'll do a dance for you, because we basically turn these ghosts into little toys that we can fucking conjure up as somebody's little toy, because we got fucking African slaves that probably might not have been speaking English in the first place, responding to these dumbass people who won't even bother to learn French.
No, I was operating more under the assumption that you gotta be like New Orleans. I was operating more of the assumption that like that black slaves wouldn't have ended up as ghosts.
I've heard people come to this rationalization before, because they're like, people went through so much torment that they just automatically got into heaven. Oh, is that a heaven with a white Jesus?
No, I don't even think it's a heaven issue. I just don't think that they would be selected as ghosts.
I'm saying I've heard people say that that's like, oh, that those people just aren't haunting the place because they got treated so bad that they just went straight to heaven. Like, nah, these motherfuckers want to stick around and protect their goddamn their great-grandchildren who are going to be suffering from this system, because it's like the same shit with Chinese ancestor worship. Ancestor worship was a major part of a lot of African cultures. Not all of them, but many African cultures, to the point where what people have turned into mythical voodoo practice and this romanticized African black magic, that was some religious shit that has some real power in it, that now people want to commodify and turn into Ghost Nation and Ghost fucking Ghost Hunters International, and turn around and try to conjure up my fucking ancestors to dance for them so they can sell it on a show, and then disconnect me from my history so I can't call my ancestors when I need that fucking black magic on my side, because they put me in a system where I'm going to grow up thinking I need to worship a white Jesus, to pray to that white Jesus to come save me, instead of my ancestors to come help me, because these systems had established that if there's a larger God, he's too fucking, or he or she's too fucking busy to deal with you. So deal with your ancestors that just died and are hanging around to fucking protect you.
Oh,
that's basically how these systems work.
That's very real. Like, the Jade Emperor doesn't deal with humans. The Jade Emperor has way too much shit to deal with. You're lucky if you even get to deal with your ancestors. You're more likely to deal with some random ghost that's like you happen upon who's trying to do their ghost thing.
So pray one of your ancestors shows up, because it might not be them, like you're saying, and that's when the jinn show up in the Islamic culture, and sometimes they pretend to be your ancestors, and they show up and pretend to be somebody that you trust, because your grandma just died or your uncle just died, and this apparition appears to you pretending to be your uncle because they just fucking died, and you're in a vulnerable state. Because you weren't praying to your uncle, because you're praying to some false idol.
I think in Taoism, actually, like if you have achieved like spiritual balance with the universe, you don't stick around. You get to rejoin the energy of the universe.
It's not just Taoism either. It's samsara. There's multiple iterations of that, and I mean it's in physics.
Yeah.
You know, so there's multiple iterations of that concept of returning to the universe.
Yeah, and Judaism as well. After a parent or a close relative passes away, there's a period of months that, depending on the level of spiritual advancement or the level of connection to the divine that person had during their life, or how, I suppose one word could be like polished or develop the relationship between the physical world and the spiritual connection was during lifetime. There's a period of months where the soul is basically in a state of like purification, and you're supposed to pray or recite prayers, and usually it's recited and led by a group leader, and then you recite these prayers for 11 months or so until the soul then moves on to the next step.
Is it no, Sheol is the bad place that was added later. I don't think that's the name of it, because
man, they're like
Sheol is like the one that people
they're like
equate with
10,000
hell.
hells, man. In Chinese culture, there's like the hell of boiling oil, and hell of boiling skin, and hell of boiling eyeballs, and hell of whatever you can think of, like to punish somebody. There's a hell of it, a hell of a lot of it.
Like there are a lot of in the Levantine cultures and Semitic cultures, there are varying traditions regarding what hell is. As far as I've learned in my Jewish spiritual practice, there hasn't necessarily been a hell, like a specific place where your soul goes to get tortured for a while. Yep. It's really just like if you were really just cut off from anything spiritual during your life, or you did some terrible things, no matter how bad you were, no matter how disconnected you were, it's basically a matter of spiritual garments or obfuscation or covering up of what's known as the light within you, or the light that helps define you.
On Earth you can buy hell bank notes.
Like Sheol and hell were later additions to Judaism, were not originally part of because it's like Hades. I think it came in around the time of the Greek Empire or something, or it may have even come from India, but as far as I know, it was not originally part of Judaism, but did get added later in some sects, so it's not even ubiquitous in Judaism.
No, and what's interesting is that in biblical study, you find sin offerings, essentially, when the high priest would basically transmute the sins of all the Jewish people into one particular animal and then send it out into the desert.
So
it's called they so there's an offering that they burn.
Yeah.
And then there's an offering that they send out to the desert, but that one's called basically Lishlach L'Azazel.
So my tribe has to do that. My tribe has but not just that one. It's like this gets where it's like what you were explaining earlier about the tribal affiliations. Like people don't understand that. So I'm technically a Jew based on my tribal affiliation, and it's one of these things. Anybody can join this tribe, but it's the Nazarite tribe. They only have a few rules, but this goes back before Christian. It's a pre-Christian tribe, and there's many black people who were part of it, but you don't have to be black to be a Nazarite. And Nazarites had dreadlocks thousands of years before Rastas. So Jewish people had dreads before Rastas.
Yeah, Samson was a Nazarite.
Exactly. Samson is a notorious Rasta, or not Rasta, but dreadlock that people don't realize. But what I'm getting at is like, this is where it's not a religious. It's like the tribe I'm part of is like has always been anti-literature in that it doesn't hold any books sacred, because they only have so many values that they're saying can be uncorrupted. That they're like, there's only like 4 things as rules you can do that cannot be corrupted, and they're so basic that's why they're like, if somebody writes it down in a book, that shit is already too complex to be trusted as something that is not corrupted by man and it's not from God, if you perceive there to be something that is that holy. So that's why, again, it's like all the different tribes don't see texts or teaching in the same way, in the same light. That's why you have black Jews, you have African Jews that go back thousands of years, that didn't just convert recently.
Right.
Like in
Ethiopia, there are thousands and thousands of Ethiopian Jews, and they were actually brought into Israel through a large scale operation.
I read about that.
People have this idea in their mind of what Jews are supposed to look like because of white supremacist anti-Semitism.
Yep.
That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, and in regards to the rules, the 4 rules that are prescribed by your tribal affiliation. I mean, in what I've learned, there are the 10 commandments, but then there are 613 mitzvahs, and mitzvot can be interpreted as positive and restrictive, or positive and negative, things you should do and things you shouldn't do. And depending on how extensively or how fully you follow all of those rules, I mean, there are a few people who are actually able to meet all of those particular requirements. But they're there. And then for people who are essentially, trying to be righteous in and of themselves, but they're not within the Jewish tribe, there are 7 laws called the 7 Noahide laws, which are the rules that were meant to be followed by righteous people prior to the creation of the translation and transmutation of the 10 Commandments.
No, man, that's like, in understanding how that played out, it's very clear to one who is objective, understanding why rules are created, why someone would try to create an ethical set of rules and standards by which groups should live by together, but also why those things change depending on where you go or who comes into your group. So again, it's like, the different tribes of Judaism, they're going to have drastically different views of like, the necessity of like cutting one's hair or like,
hey, so I
growing a beard.
While we're talking about rules, tell me if this sounds familiar. There are 10 precepts of Taoism. Do not kill, but always be mindful of the host of living beings. Do not be lascivious or think depraved thoughts. Do not steal or receive unrighteous wealth. Do not cheat or misrepresent good and evil. Do not get intoxicated, but always think of pure contact. I will maintain harmony with my ancestors and family and never disregard my kin. When I see someone do a good deed, I will support him with joy and delight. When I see someone unfortunate, I will support him with dignity to recover good fortune. When someone comes to do me harm, I will not harbor thoughts of revenge. As long as all beings have not attained the Tao, I will not expect myself to do so myself. That's
so one of the biggest prevailing theories amongst people who have been searching for the closest thing to objective truth for a very long time is that the missing period of Jesus in the Bible would have had him going to the East to learn what would have been either Buddhist or Taoist teachings or a combination. And in that would articulate that there were already connections. So those teachings of the 10 Commandments are pre-Jesus in the timeline. But the issue is then knowing those Taoist teachings probably predated the 10 Commandments, or maybe happened right around the same time, it would start to validate these conspiracy theories as to where Jesus got his teachings in a lot of the cases, as to why you only hear about him as an adult and don't hear about his middle life, because he wasn't actually in Syria or Damascus or in those areas. He was actually in China or somewhere over there.
Well, given what I believe we understand about traditional Chinese medicine and its vast history and to certain extent its efficacy, me having gone for acupuncture treatments and received traditional Chinese medical treatment in the past for certain injuries, perhaps that missing period was also a time when he was able to learn some of the skills or the abilities that were interpreted as miraculous healing abilities.
Right. Or, I mean, in having the goblet of him being a magician and the magi, like the 3 wise men or the magi visiting him, they were in a proto-alchemic period in which, like you're saying, if he's able to turn water into wine or effectively distill alcohol or ferment alcohol, then he's going to look like a magician. Or even in the quote unquote miracle of him being able to feed 5,000, it doesn't say he multiplied the food. he's basically teaching people how to manage resources. And if people don't understand how to manage resources, that's going to seem like magic. If you can say, hey, bring me all your shit together, and if we just ration it, everybody can eat. He's not like, he didn't wave a magic wand and have 2 fish turn into 30,000 fish. That's not what the story says. It literally says he has everybody bring their stuff together, and then everybody can eat because they share the food. So it's like the stuff that has been turned into miracles and myths of magic actually have very logical explanations as to why they would have been seen as magic at the time amongst a bunch of stupid people, when you have a bunch of stupid people misinterpreting them now.
So Judaism comes about in like 1800 BCE, and then Taoism emerges 1,500 years later in 300 BCE, roughly.
I think they found 10,000-year-old tablets that reference like Judaic like teaching. So
yeah, there are these stels, these pillars that are all throughout the Levantine region, Mesopotamian, Babylonia. And they basically are these columns that have inscriptions, and a lot of them reference Judaic history.
And they've been dated to like 10,000 based on, I think, the sediment layers.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where, when you have these tablets dated to 10,000, you can't have the literalists saying that the earth is 6,000 years old.
Right.
You have religious tablets that are older than how old they were saying. Because then there's like the Gilgamesh shit. You know, there's stuff outside of it.
We have lead plutonium dating. We know how old things are up to like almost like 5 billion years now with accuracy. Like that to me is one of those things. Like, guys, we can calculate how old it is based on the isotope that emerges from lead plutonium crystal, and like we can do that with quartz from on the moon. So the whole idea that the Earth's only 6,000 years old, that's just sad now.
Yeah, it's real sad.
A lot of people still base their religious beliefs around that, and you know, I'm not.
Yeah, and they're like 1 million flat earthers globally. You know, like, so clearly people are running with the wrong information.
Yeah. Well, and the craziest part about it is, like, you hear more Christian people I've found talk about like the like enslavement of Jews back in the day, but also skip over the Holocaust in a way where it's like they want this apocalypse to happen, and that's these same people that support Israel, and those are the ones that always talk about Egyptian slavery, but still maybe need to see some more evidence for the Holocaust. And it's this weird cognitive dissonance of like the people that you're like, they support Israel, but they're still anti-Semitic.
I bet those are the same people who don't think that we have concentration camps with kids from South America in them right now.
Exactly the same people. It's exactly the same people, because they allow themselves to be in this cognitive dissonance because of white supremacist Christian ideology.
Yeah,
that tells them to romanticize Jewish slaves in the past.
Yeah, I'm a little naive to this particular philosophy you're discussing of people who don't necessarily acknowledge the Holocaust, but acknowledge the biblical plight of the Jewish people, and at the same time support Israel in whatever capacity. But it's difficult to fully support Israel or understand exactly what you're supporting without understanding the Holocaust and its impact on the global Jewish diaspora. Apparently, that
neon neck maneuver that was performed and murdered that man is fairly common, commonly carried out by is it IDF? Yeah, it's the IDF when they go into Palestinian-controlled regions and have to put down protests. They end up putting their neon Palestinian necks and faces. It's
okay. Yeah. No, that's a pretty challenging and difficult restraining technique. Oftentimes when soldiers do engage in behavior like that, an activity like that, it's documented to their superiors and it's typically investigated. But it does happen. There's not necessarily an explanation for it beyond
brutality.
Brutality, and brutality in its many forms. But it's also difficult to see pictures like that and also understand the dynamics of what necessarily is occurring around them or what's preceding it. In this case, with the neon neck technique that we saw in America or in Minnesota, there was a completely non-violent individual who was basically not necessarily resisting, not providing any particular threat, was not committing a crime.
It was alleged check fraud. And
it was alleged check fraud.
He didn't even commit check fraud.
Right. So you're
He's
seeing
like an LGBTQ plus lawyer, I think, right?
So you're seeing war zone tactics. Or you're seeing, not necessarily protests, but I would call them riots. I would wager to call them riots because oftentimes in situations like that where the Israeli forces go to those lengths is because they've often had rocks thrown at them, or they've been attacked or put into a position where they need to subdue somebody in a particularly violent manner to send a message to the people around them, because those people are typically infused with the message and the support of their local governments that the Jewish forces need to be exterminated, or the Jewish people need to be exterminated, and that's a pretty tough specter to face, especially in any kind of confrontation. And if you're dealing with a mob of people or a large group of people who are approaching you in a violent manner or challenging a particularly agreed upon authority within a region between two governments, and then flaunting the rules of that mutual agreement. So in this case, it would be an agreement between the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli government, or it would be an agreement or a ceasefire between Hamas and the Israeli government. And Hamas, by the way, has a charter that basically says that they are in a holy jihad against Israel and basically against all Jews. And
Hamas is the intelligence wing of the Iranian government, right?
That's Hezbollah.
Oh, Hezbollah.
I don't think it's an intelligence wing of the Iranian government, but Hezbollah is a proxy of the Iranian government. Hamas is a Sunni fundamentalist Islamic group that was elected by a popular vote into control over the Gaza Strip. And
which is why it's kind of confusing, because there's the party and then there's a terrorist group, and they get conflated as if they're not
in this case, the party is the terrorist group. At least they have a terrorist designation.
It's not that simple. It's not that simple, because the Palestinian people would not agree, because that's where it's like, I got to draw the line at equating those two, in that if you have as long as their vote was not commandeered and manipulated, the people that operate in the government cannot be equated with the same ones that operate on the street, even if they have the same name. You just can't equate, because they have different mandates. It's not the same. Like, even if they happen to have the same name, they have completely different mandates, because then the people in the position of government authority,
that's like
they still have legal, even though they set the legal standards, they have legal standards that they have to follow that the ones in the street don't have to.
That's like Sinn Féin and the IRA. Sinn Féin was the political wing of the IRA, and I think I remember that they would often decry the actions, the terrorist actions themselves that were being carried out by the military wing. They would say, this is not part of our course of action. They were trying to reach an agreement through diplomacy, but they were still directly tied to one another, because Ireland wants freedom.
Well, and the only reason I push back on that is because I remember when Hamas got voted in, and it was at a time when tensions are never low,
They haven't been since before Israel was even created.
Right, exactly.
And that's largely due to British influence, if you really think about it.
Exactly. So it's never been like
still feeling
since
the
colonialism has been over there.
Bullshit from the British Empire.
Never been.
But think about it. Think about it this way. I mean, in terms of the Sykes-Picot Agreement that basically created the split between the French and British territories after they took over that area from the Ottoman Empire. You had the British Mandate of Palestine, and that's basically where you had Arabs, Jews, and Christians and Muslims, of all kinds living together already in varying capacities. And ultimately, then you had basically the Transjordanian area, which was then given to King Abdullah. And, the British basically pulled out in 1948. In 1947,
hey guys, we're gonna fuck your shit up, and then we're gonna just disappear. But we're gonna ghost.
Get this. So there is a Lieutenant General Jonathan Bagot Glubb, who's known as Glubb Pasha, and he was basically in charge of the Arab Legion of the Transjordanian military. And as soon as the British withdrew their final people from Palestine, and again, I have family members, I have ancestors who have Palestinian citizenship papers, and they are designated Palestinian Jews. So, the Palestinians we see today are basically, it's a Palestinian territory. It's deemed Palestinian, but there were just as many Palestinian Jews as there were Palestinian Arabs. And then subsequently, the Jewish population or the Jewish settlers who were basically working on an organized, settling plan that had basically been initiated in the 1890s by Theodor Herzl, who was a Viennese journalist and basically originated the concept of Zionism and did a lot of networking with a lot of world leaders and trying to gain some support and lost some support, but ultimately generated enough interest and enough support to, have people come into Israel, Jews come into Israel from the diaspora, where they were being largely persecuted, and basically settle in an area that was largely owned in terms of the land. Wasn't necessarily producing much, but was largely owned by Arab landowners who eventually were all too happy to sell that land to the Jews. And then subsequently with the Transjordanian army. So moving back to that, you had Glubb Pasha basically leading the Transjordanian army against the Israelis, who basically had to fight off a majority of the Arab nations surrounding them as soon as they were granted independence by the United Nations. So you had
the first time that shit has happened, because that's the colonial way, is to take somebody's land, give it to a displaced group, and then let them fight it out, and then act like they weren't the ones that caused the problem in the first place.
Right, but I think, in some ways they were trying to solve what's always been globally known as the Jewish problem.
It wasn't trying to solve a problem.
That's
it was
just
neo-colonialism
with a fancy hat.
It was giving the appearance of solving the problem by appeasing one group's problem to then create another problem to which they could hold the keys and hold everything over. Like the military might that Israel gets from the West was what they hold over their head to then control the region's tensions, to then give Israel the feeling of autonomy, but it's really because they just always have the slight edge over their neighbors to keep them in check, because that's what they're actually there for, was to keep the other brown people in check, because they can say, oh, we got in the back door with Massa, and Massa let us into this group, so even though we got our homeland now from other displaced people, it's now our homeland, so we'll fight these other people to defend what Massa gave us, because they did this same shit to black people. All these lines that they drew in all these African countries and in the Middle Eastern countries to keep us fighting, they didn't start that shit in Israel. They didn't start that shit in Palestine. They didn't start that shit in Nigeria. They didn't start that shit in the Ottoman Empire. They've been doing this shit for fucking hundreds of years and have it perfected in a way where now it's like, when we discuss the Opium Wars as past.
Wait, are you talking about the Opium Wars from China or the Opium Wars that were happening in America?
any of them.
Okay.
If when we discuss the opium wars as in the being in the past, it makes it seem like they stop. So at a point when
it's like the Crusades.
Exactly. So when we start to frame things as a historical window through which we see them as having beginnings and end, then you have people asking me, what happens at the end of this riot in Minnesota? Like, what do you mean? This is not a fucking movie. People have to, like, coexist daily, and we're at a point where people cannot coexist because they have white supremacist infrastructure has come to such a head that existing daily is nearly impossible for black people. So then the white fence sitters have to come to this point where they're like, if they don't pick a side, then now do you have black people getting mad at the fence sitters because their fence sitting is making my life impossible to exist daily. So everything is at a head now.
Yeah. Well, the fence sitters are the anchor.
Yep.
They're the real anchor.
Back.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, thanks. No, I was just going to say, going back to just if we take out the concept of colonialism and we just look at, the terms of trying to unite a global community, and we look at the relationship between the Jewish people who live in Israel, who are known as Israelis because of the nation that was created. And we look at the relationship between them and the people that are known as the Palestinians, who have varying heritages and various clan affiliations within their own cultures, going back hundreds of years, if not thousands. It's never been a goal of Israel to actively look for ways to fight their neighbors. In fact, they look for ways to collaborate and grow with their neighbors. And what's been unfortunate is that there's been a concerted effort from the leadership of nations that basically are the patrons of in many ways of the Palestinian people, outside of the relationship between the relationship that they have with Israel, that produces an enmity or promotes an enmity between them and who they perceive to be the Zionist aggressors. And really, at the end of the day, it's not about Zionism. It's basically about trying to promote an ideal or an idealist perspective or a fundamentalist perspective that dehumanizes a neighbor and prevents meaningful diplomatic discussions from even being considered. And that's where you have, the jihadist charters of political organizations that are in power, that, as you said, have a hierarchical structure between the people who are sitting in government and the people who are making policy and the people who are executing. But at the same time, there were instances during the confrontation in around 2014 between Israel and the Gaza Strip, where you had Hamas basically saying that anybody who is perceived to be a collaborator, pay attention to your neighbors, because you had the imams in the mosques basically saying, pay attention to your neighbors, because anybody who's a collaborator should be executed, and they actually did execute people in the streets.
No, I'm not disputing any of that, but we also need to discuss the concept of rhetoric versus capacity to execute rhetoric, because the rhetoric is often used as an excuse for a disproportionate response, in the same way that when Georgia was talking about moving or kind of expanding its territory, Russia's counter response was disproportionate to the Georgian rhetoric, with the world understanding that the country with the smaller army can talk, but they can't strike the way they talk. So when we're talking about rockets fired into Israel from the Gaza Strip, it's like, yeah, how many of those rockets are actually capable of doing damage, and how many of them are just rockets fired into the countryside that are meant to be there to create the sense of, we're not going to accept a friendship with you, but knowing these rockets don't actually have the capacity to make it all the way to the city, and then having those rockets being fired into Israel turn around in America, being used to galvanize support for Americans to get behind Israel's army. So it's this like I get, like, when people are getting executed, yeah, there's fucking really people getting executed in the Gaza Strip that are, like, subject to the Palestinian war and victims. I'm not disputing that. It's a matter of when the rhetoric starts to equate the Palestinian army's might with the Israeli army's might, knowing they're not anywhere near equal, as if that rhetoric then has equal weight, is kind of disingenuous.
So when you talk about rhetoric, you also have to take into account that it's not just about launching rockets. And also, if you think about it, if any other country were to launch rockets into any other country, so I mean, you had Ukraine and Russia.
We do it all the time.
America Peninsula, and
America does it all the time.
Far less condemnation globally for all these other countries that are doing it than when Israel does it. So that's one thing to talk about. The other thing to talk about is a lot of the rhetoric that we hear from these organizations that tend to target Israel is the support for entering the country, so that would be Israel, and then kidnapping people or attacking them or stabbing them or driving into them or blowing themselves up in crowded areas. And there's a storied history of attacks that target civilians directly. So it's not just a matter of, okay, we're going to be a regulated army that's well funded by whoever, and we're going to go up against you on these terms, and we're going to follow the Geneva Convention. Oftentimes, you have the Israeli military basically dealing with an organization that flaunts the Geneva Convention in regards to how it deals with its own people by using them as human shields, and also in regards to how it approaches its dealings with Israel in terms of attacking civilians.
I'm just going to say this really just comes back to, 500 some years of British colonialism fucking up the world. That's like, to me, that's just where I just keep thinking about colonialism through all of this. I think that the people in Israel are doing the best they can. I think that Mossad, it does the exact same thing. They do the exact thing that they need to do. I think that all of these countries that are in that position are it's a survival thing. It's not cut and dry. It's not even the kind of thing that people can fully comprehend because the history is so complicated. And that's just kind of the way that works. It's a really tough calculus because we don't get to see the whole story. We only really know like the bits and pieces that were given piecemeal through the media, and even that piecemeal story that the media presents, it's just an attempt to get the tail to wag the dog. We've got endless supply of spin doctoring going on, and I don't think that the average Palestinian citizen is doing anything but trying to get by. And I think
it's the same for Israeli citizens too, man.
That's the thing. I think that on some level, the politicization of tension in the Middle East, or the tension between Israel and Palestine, is just another mechanism of the consent manufacturing engine. And really, we're all on the ground, and I read these comments and like, oh, it's not like our vote matters, or I'm just powerless, I can't do anything about that. And that's the part that's actually, that's the fence sitting. It's actually very easy to do something. It starts at the local level. We find the people who have good ideas, and we figure out how to get those people into offices as public servants, like the local sheriff or the mayor or somebody on the board of directors, or any of or the school boards. We find places for people who have good ideas to be able to serve the public. And then eventually, as the higher up seats get vacated, because congressmen get old and believe it or not, some congressmen actually retire at some point. They don't stick it out until they die. But eventually those seats, open up, and then qualified people who have been in the system for a while move up into power. And this is an effort that's going to require literally everyone working together. We all have to figure out a way to agree. Otherwise, we're just left with this broken system that doesn't actually deliver on the promise of freedom. It just puts it off until later, like somebody else is going to fix the problem later. But I don't even think that works. So we've got to figure this out. I like talking about China because I'm part Chinese, but China's been around for 4,000 years. They've figured it out. They call it a dynastic change, but really the rules haven't changed that much. Taoism is still kind of the way that people work about things in China, even though they have legal systems and they've got structures of officials throughout the land at various state levels to govern the place. It's still China. It's the modern version of China that existed 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago. There's some minor changes, but it's the same reason that what we have here is a variation of what was the British Empire, which was the Roman Empire, which was the Greeks and Mesopotamians, and goes all the way back in time till, I think it was Hammurabi that came up with the first code of conduct, right?
Yeah, eye for an eye.
Yeah, well, that dude came up with the fucking eye for an eye. That on its own is kind of fucked up too. But I mean,
but you got to think of the time that they were living in, what was allowed, and this guy
was real true.
This guy was the leader.
Yeah,
this guy was the anointed by God. This was the man.
Yeah,
and basically everybody had to bow down to him. Right. Yeah. And he's like, all right, I'm going to set up some laws. What's gonna keep people from rising up against me? First off, because he's probably a smart guy because he wants to make laws in the first place, and that's actually a great idea.
Well, no, that's the reason that we remember Hammurabi is because he gave us the first. That's as far back as we know, at least the first code of conduct that survived, and you got to go thousands of years into the future to find I'm not even sure they're real improvements over the way the laws are created and given. I mean, I'm pretty sure that what we're seeing now is still some variation of eye for an eye. I'm not sure.
So I think, especially with institutionalized racism and white supremacy, there's actually a preference for that kind of approach. You take from me, I'm going to take from you. With the rise of litigation globally, with the accessibility to litigation globally, it's like if you slight me in any small way, I'm going to take all of your stuff. Like that, that's eye for an eye in a very amplified way, but litigious.
In America, it's not about hurting people physically so much as hurting them financially and hurting their ability to gain. To improve their financial situation in the future. It's how do I take away the ability to improve one's life while still allowing them to be alive, which is
to benefit me.
Yeah,
how do I basically leech off of this person for the rest of their lives?
Well, isn't that what an agent does?
I don't know enough about the business. I've only seen a couple of episodes of Entourage, but I have seen Ballers.
Oh boy. Yeah, no, I think that, I think you're right. I think we've created, our society has enabled a select group of people who are willing to go to get a certain type of education to benefit off of other people in ways that I'm pretty sure it says in the Bible that you're not even supposed to be able to do that kind of stuff. I think there's only Jewish people were allowed to create deals where they gained interest or something like that.
No, actually, interest is forbidden.
Oh, interest is forbidden. Then there's
you can loan to people, but you're not supposed to charge interest.
Okay, that's what it is then. Yeah,
but
like,
you know, there are still people who happen to be Jewish who, you know.
No, I think I totally
this,
screwed that up. There's like it's not, you're not allowed to get interest on a loan, but there's like, I think that actually maybe I was thinking about the right thing, in that we had a system that said no, don't do this at one point, but we've undermined it through our legal system. That we've recreated laws. What
we've allowed our legal system to evolve into.
Yeah. It in a sense has undermined the basic rules that keep people from fucking each other.
Well, it's because the machine was made to become inaccessible. The illusion is that the machine is so large and so complex that only key people with the right permissions should be able to, you know, engage in its administration. And that's just not the truth. I mean, maybe it's the truth now, but that's only because
I don't think it's the truth. I think it's the reality.
It's the reality, right? Yeah.
And the reality is controlled by the people with the power.
And it's because the masses were placated in such a way that, you know, allowed power to be consolidated.
Yeah, they're placated with cheap products from China and cheap goods.
Right? And the promise of jobs that like never come, and then assuaging the rage that comes with the inability to get a job with blaming it on people who don't look like you, because it's so easy to blame the other.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all we've got for the night. Thanks for listening.
Exceptional Radio. Exceptional Randos Show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.